Most people believe AI is coming for jobs. That's the fear repeated in headlines, podcasts, and workplace conversations.
So AI may be coming for some job sectors.
The idea that one day you'll be replaced by a machine that works faster, costs less, and never complains. But that fear is pointing in the wrong direction. AI isn't replacing jobs. It's replacing careers, the long, structured paths people spend 10 or 20 years building. The paths that once felt stable, predictable, and worth sacrificing for. The invisible architecture that gave work its meaning beyond the paycheck. And the most dangerous part is how quietly it happens. There are no mass layoffs, no sudden collapses, no dramatic announcements that mark a clear before and after. Instead, the shift is slow and almost invisible. Job listings quietly disappear from boards. Pay growth flattens without explanation. Promotions stop making sense, delayed by vague promises of next quarter or when the timing's right. The ladder you were climbing still exists, firmly planted against the wall, but it no longer leads anywhere meaningful. By the time most people realize what's happening, they're not unemployed. They're still working, still busy, still exhausted from back-to-back meetings and endless deliverables. But they're no longer moving forward. They're treading water in a pool that's slowly draining. The old promise of careers. Careers were not an accident. They weren't arbitrary social constructs or corporate manipulation. They existed because of how knowledge worked for most of modern history. Expertise was slow to acquire. Learning took years of repetition, failure, mentorship, and exposure to situations textbooks couldn't capture. Information was scarce, expensive, and difficult to transfer. Books were costly. Access to experts was limited. Industry knowledge stayed locked behind closed doors and professional networks. If you wanted to master something complex, surgery, law, engineering, financial analysis, there were no shortcuts. That slowness created value. Specialization mattered because it was difficult to copy. You couldn't download someone's 20 years of experience. Credentials mattered because they signaled long-term commitment and institutional validation. Experience mattered because it couldn't be rushed, borrowed, or faked convincingly. White-collar work felt especially protected. Law, finance, design, marketing, software development, these fields weren't just about executing tasks on a checklist. They were about judgment, interpretation, and understanding systems that changed slowly and required contextual awareness that supposedly only humans could develop. Underneath it all was an unspoken agreement, a social contract that generations accepted without question. Invest your best years. Accept lower pay early while you learn. Follow the rules. Build expertise methodically. Play the long game. And in return, you get stability, a sense of direction, a future that makes sense, retirement security, respect from your community. Not guaranteed success, but reliable progress. Not wealth for everyone, but a path forward that felt real. The assumption that broke everything. The failure wasn't ignorance. It was logic that stopped working. We assumed complexity protected careers. For centuries, this assumption held true. Complexity meant something was hard to replicate. If a role required deep knowledge, sophisticated pattern recognition, or long training cycles, it remained valuable and scarce. The more complex the work, the safer the career seemed. But AI doesn't learn like humans. It doesn't struggle toward understanding through trial and error. It doesn't need coffee breaks or sleep. It doesn't get frustrated or plateau. It compresses knowledge in ways biological brains simply cannot. It absorbs massive volumes of information, millions of documents, cases, designs. It never forgets. It never slows down. It never needs refresher courses. And once it learns something, it applies it everywhere at the same time, across infinite parallel instances. This is not traditional automation. Traditional automation replaced predictable physical tasks, robots on assembly lines, ATMs instead of bank tellers, self-checkout instead of cashiers. That was substitution, one thing for another. This is different. This isn't replacing tasks one by one. It's removing scarcity from expertise itself. AI didn't automate work. It commoditized expertise. How careers actually die. Careers don't collapse overnight. There's no single catastrophic event. They erode gradually, almost invisibly, like a coastline losing inches to the tide. The first damage appears at the bottom. Entry-level roles become harder to find, not eliminated entirely, but severely limited. Fewer openings, higher expectations for candidates. The traditional starting point where you're supposed to be inefficient while you learn starts disappearing. Companies realize they don't need 5 junior analysts when AI can do the preliminary work. They don't need 3 junior designers when AI handles first drafts. They don't need entry-level programmers for routine maintenance when AI assists senior developers directly. Then mid-level roles stagnate. People remain in the same positions longer, often years beyond what used to be normal. Responsibility increases while authority and pay remain flat. You're doing more, managing more complexity, but the economic value of that complexity is declining. Fewer seats at the top, more competition, less leverage in negotiations, more pressure to constantly justify relevance against the question, couldn't AI do most of this? And here's the critical detail most people miss, the thing that makes this so insidious. No one is fired. The pipeline stops feeding. Junior analysts aren't trained because there's no economic justification. Legal research becomes background noise handled by AI tools. Software maintenance shifts from craftsmanship to oversight. Design production becomes execution without ownership. The job still exists. The career doesn't. You're employed. You're busy. You're producing deliverables. But you're not building toward anything. The future version of your role, the one you're working toward, is slowly being deleted from the organizational chart. The white-collar illusion. For decades, white-collar work felt untouchable, protected by a moat of complexity that seemed impossible to cross. Blue-collar work was constrained by physics, locality, and liability. A plumber still needs to be present. An electrician still needs to physically wire a building. A construction worker still operates in three-dimensional space with materials that have weight and consequence. White-collar work relied on different protections. Information advantage, time invested in learning, credential scarcity that limited supply. Information is no longer rare, it's infinite and instantly accessible. Time is no longer a barrier. AI compresses decades of learning into training runs. Credentials no longer guarantee differentiation when AI can pass the bar exam. What does a law degree protect? And the irony is deeply uncomfortable, because the more a role relied on processing information, recognizing patterns, and applying standardized judgment, the easier it was to compress into statistical models. What replaces careers? This is where most conversations fail, where the analysis stops and the platitudes begin. They rush towards solutions, forced optimism, or apocalyptic panic. They offer advice, checklists, and motivational slogans. Adapt or die. Learn to work with AI. Focus on soft skills. Be more creative. But what's happening isn't a clean replacement. Work breaks into temporary roles, overlapping skill stacks, and project-based value that never quite compounds into security. The new risk isn't being unskilled. It's being perfectly trained for something that no longer compounds in value, being optimized for a game that's quietly changing its rules. People with strong resumes, impressive credentials from top universities, years of relevant experience, glowing recommendations, and absolutely no control over where their work leads next, because the next rung has been removed while they weren't looking. That's the quiet threat, the uncomfortable truth. This isn't a crash, it isn't mass unemployment, and it isn't the end of work itself. It's a slow reset that rewrites the basic relationship between effort, expertise, and economic reward. A shift so gradual that most people won't notice until they're already inside it, looking around and wondering when everything changed. The real danger isn't losing your job tomorrow, just a future that quietly closes in, opportunity by opportunity, until the path you thought you were on exists only in memory. AI isn't taking jobs. It's removing the economic value of entire career paths while leaving the jobs themselves temporarily intact. And once you understand that distinction, the question isn't whether you'll be replaced. If this way of thinking made you uncomfortable, that's the point. Comfort is what allows these shifts to happen unnoticed. Subscribe for more videos that break down what's actually happening without hype, without fear, and without pretending everything will be fine if you just work a little harder.